Grant Dania now.
It's Grant Dania.
The gold lady this year. Oh my God, it's Grant Dania.
And our mum, Shazzy Dania. She's really crazy. And George, affectionately known as Large Sarge.
It's all true. It's all true. The podcast with Grant and Shazzy Dania.
And George.
Welcome to It's All True. It's great to be sitting here with my beloved wife of who
beloved
can't even remember
today.
how many years. That's how much I love her. Yep. This is the place, the safe place where we come to discuss things away from children and have adult conversations because let's face it, when you got kids, it never bloody happens. And we've got three of them.
Which is three too many, we realised yesterday on a plane coming back from Queensland.
Wasn't that fun?
Far out. You only have two hands. Remember, everybody kept saying that to us.
Yeah, they go two's good because God gave you two hands.
Yeah.
When you have three, one's on the loose.
Yeah. And our third, you need six hands.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the pilot, he was trying to fly that beautiful plane and keep all those passengers safe and land it. And there was a lot of banging on that cockpit door from our 3-year-old. He was pretty keen to find out how it all worked. But we made it. We're here. We are sans George today. He's currently working. But today, for me, this is what I live for. This is where I'm at. This is my heart and soul, and this occupies a good 98% of my operating brain at the moment.
You are obsessed.
It's
can
right
I
at the
say?
frontal cortex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's consuming a lot of my thought space because UFOs are something that has been sitting in my mind for so long, and I've been kicking around like a lonely soldier, too afraid to speak up because people would call me a kook. And now it's starting to become a little bit more
Widespread. Well,
Yeah.
you spoke about it a few years ago on Spotlight, Channel 7 Spotlight program, and we were email bombed by so many people saying that they saw the same thing and that they felt so comforted by the fact that you spoke out.
Now, I'm so glad you said this because the esteemed journalist who interviewed me, one of the greatest operating journalistic minds of this country, with a gorgeous honey-like velvet voice, a comforting hand when I was there talking about UFOs was, of course, the great Ross Coulthart, one of the great journalists of Australia, who joins us now to explore this wonderful category. Make him welcome. It's Ross, everybody.
G'day, how are you? May the force be with
Young
you.
man.
It's lovely to see you both.
Now, if I could just cast my mind back for just a moment, I sent a message out to the then executive producer of the show going, you guys are kicking around lots of cool ideas. I heard UFOs were an upcoming topic. I sent him a text message, just said, I've seen some stuff. That's all I said. And then I get a phone call from you going, mate, would you be prepared to come on television to talk about it? And I was like, you know what? If you're doing the story, mate, you've been from 4 Corners to 60 Minutes to 7 Spotlight. You're one of the greats. This is an honor. So I said, hell yeah. And you were like, are you sure? Aren't you worried about everyone kind of thinking you've gone maybe perhaps a little mental? And I was like, mate, you know what? It's time. It's time we talk about it. And this, now correct me if I'm wrong, you're a bit of a naysayer, and now this is all you do. This is like the main thing that you do.
I am full-time investigating UAPs. In fact, I'm working with an American network called News Nation, which is a cable TV network in the US. And in between filing stories for our friends at Spotlight at Channel 7, I'm doing a lot of investigative journalism into a story that is now fast becoming, Grant, very mainstream. You need no shame anymore. The stigma and the taboo that's associated with the subject of UAPs, let's be clear, unidentified anomalous phenomena, is no longer. Basically, we are now acknowledging that the US government has been involved in a very deliberate disinformation program to make people think for the last 60 or 70 years that this was all bollocks. And now they are being dragged kicking and screaming to the table in Congress, in congressional hearings and committees, admitting it's real.
See, how far back was our story? We were...
Oh, it was a few
2
years
years,
ago.
2 years
Couple
ago.
of years?
Yeah. Couple of years.
So
yeah.
only 2 years ago, this was taboo. This was career suicide to do. I was a mainstream
It still is, I think. It still is. I cop it all the time from my friends in the media who laugh. They see it as a pejorative that Ross Coulthart is investigating UAPs, and I think it's frankly good they're not looking, because, my friend, this is the biggest story in human history. I know it's real because I talk all the time now to sources in the US and in Australia, and they're confirming it's real. And I think we're seeing a very slow rollout of a new reality, a completely new paradigm.
I'm getting goosebumps. What was there one thing that changed your mind?
Grant Daniel. When Grant Daniel came on, he was so convincing. Ross was like, screw, the wars of the world, screw taking down big corporate, bad players. I'm now all in on UFOs.
Because obviously you've seen so much. I just wondered, what was the one thing where you went, oh shit, I can't explain that.
It actually happened quite early. I was working for 60 Minutes, and as Grant would know, you often spend a lot of time sitting alone in hotel rooms waiting for Carl Stefanovich to finish with the crew before you can go off and do your shoot. And so I was killing time in Washington, D.C., and I approached some people that I met in Afghanistan when I was embedded with the US military in Afghanistan. And I said, look, I'm thinking of writing a book, and I'm just wondering, is there anybody you could put me onto who I could speak to about the phenomenon of UFOs? And I expected the person to laugh at me, and instead they said, oh, give me half a day. And they came back, and probably about the next evening after, I was sitting down in a pub in Georgetown in front of a good Sam Adams lager, and a lot of Sam Adams lager was consumed as a very interesting and senior official from a certain arm of the US government sat me down and told me, Ross, this is real, and we welcome the fact that an investigative journalist like you is prepared to engage with this subject because, frankly, we think that it's time the public started to realize that this is real. And I was told about an incident that is now very well widely known involving the USS Nimitz, the aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, off the coast of Baja, California, sort of halfway between California and Mexico, about 100 miles out to sea in 2004. And an incident took place where essentially a large number of objects were hovering in about above 80,000 feet. Some people that have seen the imagery and the data suggest that it was actually in orbit. But basically, there were a large number, dozens of objects hovering at about 80,000 feet plus, which is essentially just above the ceiling of the radar. And then instantaneously, those objects dropped to 28,000 feet or below, one of them right down to the surface of the ocean. And so pilots were deployed from the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier. One of them was a guy called Dave Fravor, Commander Dave Fravor. And what happened was history. A whole series of sightings took place by different pilots and wingmen and wingwomen, by the way. And essentially there was a multiple corroborated incident involving anomalous objects that were tracked on radar and different highly protected sensor systems that were operated from the USS Princeton, which was another vessel in the same fleet. And what they detected was anomalous phenomena traveling at speeds that are completely beyond known human comprehension. And I'll go through what it is that describes something as anomalous. There are 5, probably 6 observables, as they're called. And the 5 main observables are instantaneous acceleration, like objects seen to go from naught to, in some cases, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kilometers an hour in the blink of an eye. And that's what happened with the USS Nimitz radar systems. They picked up these objects literally in 0.78 of a second. They went from 80,000 feet to the surface of the ocean, an estimated speed of hundreds of thousands of kilometers an hour. The other thing is hypersonic speeds, which is what we've just talked about. And then the other thing is transmedium travel. A lot of these objects, including the one that was seen in the Nimitz incident, they seem to go underwater as well, USOs, underwater submerged objects. They also go into orbit. And these are well tracked. There's an incident called the Aguadilla incident that was tracked by thermal imaging sensors from a US Coast Guard aircraft that shows an object literally going into the ocean, splitting into two, coming out of the ocean. Weird stuff, inexplicable. They're stealth. They're capable of stealth mode. They can literally go invisible. And the most interesting one of all that I'm fascinated by is positive lift. The potential that what these objects represent is some kind of technology that is capable of anti-gravitic propulsion. Is there someone, an adversary power, an extraterrestrial entity, or some kind of consciousness that is capable of operating a technology that can lift gigantic objects without any visible means of propulsion? There was no jet wash, no rotor wash, no heat source suggesting that there was a source of energy propelling these craft. They were essentially cold to the imagery, but what they were doing was beyond known human ken or known human technology. And just for the sake of it, I'll mention the sixth observable, which is increasingly popular, which is whatever these objects are, they are capable of meddling with us in a way that we don't understand biologically. They have the capacity to remotely influence humans. They can alter our perception. So maybe one possibility.
Come again.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, one possibility is that whatever these objects are, maybe they're not what we think they are. That's why I hold out the possibility that maybe they're not a technology. Maybe what they are is some kind of consciousness that's meddling with human perception. It's making us see what it wants us to see. And maybe, there's a lot of schools of thought about this, maybe that explains why throughout history, because a lot of people use this old quaint term that, how come we're only seeing UFOs in America, and how come we only see them over America? And that's bollocks. It's absolute rubbish. Humans have seen phenomena in the skies going back thousands of years. They've been recorded in the not in the fossil record, on cave art. They've been recorded in medieval paintings. There's biblical references to phenomena in the sky, Ezekiel's wheel.
Egyptian hieroglyphs even?
Yeah, in hieroglyphs. And so there's a phenomenon that's been described through human history. And what's interesting is it possible that it has represented itself to different histories of humans in different ways? So when young children saw a Catholic miracle at Medjugorje in the turn of last century, were they seeing a UFO? When people in the Middle Ages saw fighting spheres in the sky and actually rendered in a woodblock painting, was that a UFO? We just don't know. So the sixth observable is essentially something that represents a capability to meddle with human perception. It can alter what we think we're seeing. And so that's why I still hold out the possibility that maybe what we're talking about here is not a technology. Maybe what we're looking at here is something that crosses a link between the phenomenon of UAPs, strange objects in our skies. And by the way, we're not saying they're little green men from Zug. We just don't know what they are. Maybe there's a link between whatever that phenomenon is that people are routinely seeing in the sky. I mean, the volume of experiences and witnesses is enormous. Maybe there's a link between that and human consciousness. And maybe what this all is something bigger than what we know. I'm fascinated by that possibility, and there's an increasing school of thought that if we can solve the UFO mystery, maybe we'll solve bigger mysteries, such as what happens to us after we die, who's God, what is beyond us, what is beyond our universe.
Oh, it's such a beautiful thing to contemplate, isn't it? And of course, it does rewrite our understanding of who we are and our history and our biggest part of history of where we come from. How did we start? Who started us? It's such a delicious topic, right? And you talk about it, when those three wise men were following that star to find baby Jesus. what star was that? Was that a star? Was that a UFO? You know what I mean? Because when we talk
A
about
UAP.
when we talk about UAP, when we talk about the mythology of previous generations, when we talk about of multiple cultures across this globe, they all seem to align on one thing: that gods come from the sky. So was this the gods they are talking about? And you're right.
No,
Are they
I
future
agree.
versions of us? Are they
Yeah. I mean,
coming back in time? Are they a complete another entity altogether? What could they be?
I mean, it's funny, the thing I find fascinating, Grant, is you copped it at the time for speaking publicly. I remember you were teased a lot in social media and people were laughing at the idea of UFOs and flying saucers and little green men and taking the piss, basically. And the thing that I find fascinating is I talk on a routine basis to people at a high level in the US government, in the military, in the intelligence community, and they are bewildered that the mainstream media is not tracking this story, that all they do is continue to treat it with taboo and stigma. Because the one thing we now know is that the Pentagon has admitted it's real, it's official. People have missed the fact that the Pentagon has created an office that investigates UFOs, UAPs. It's called, ridiculously, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And it's been
very catchy.
Yeah, and it's been investigating UAPs now for 2 years or longer. And in fact, there's secretly been investigations going on into the phenomenon for much of the past 60 to 70 years. And so in May, and this was broadcast in June, I published a story in the US through a network called News Nation involving an interview with a guy called David Grush. And David is a former intelligence officer with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office, two of the top spy agencies in the US. And I was gobsmacked when I finally made contact with David because I'd heard about him from people I've been talking to inside, believe it or not, a program, a legacy program that has existed now for 60 or 70 years. And these people were telling me, and are still telling me, that they are working on non-human technology, that they are essentially working on bits of craft recovered by either the US or private aerospace companies that is secretly being back-engineered, or at least attempted to be back-engineered by the United States. Believe it or not, and a lot of people giggle when I say this, I think this is very likely to be true. And these people told me that there was a guy from the Pentagon who was investigating this legacy program. And I was told I should track this guy down and find him. And I did. And in the end, we ended up putting his interview on national television exclusively in the US. And he revealed that he uncovered a legacy crash retrieval and reverse engineering program that has been hidden by the US government since at least the Second World War. Now, that side of it, of course, hasn't been conceded by the US government yet. I suspect it will be soon, because it's becoming implausible for them to continue to deny it. But if you go back to the stories of Roswell, 1947, the alleged recovery of an alien spacecraft in 1947, I'm told that incident is real. And David Grush, in his interview with me, said that the witnesses that said that they saw an alien spacecraft should be taken seriously and that this matter should be being investigated. And so the Congress is, secretly, the Congress has begun investigations into this phenomenon, this allegation of a reverse engineering program that's been kept secret illegally and probably criminally from the Congress. And there's actually an ongoing investigation in the Congress at the moment at the level of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence, the House Oversight Committee and the Armed Services Committee. 4 committees in the Congress are now taking an interest in this subject, as well as the Inspectors General of the Defense Department and the intelligence community. And what's interesting is that when David Grush, my witness, went to the Inspector General of the intelligence community with his evidence that he'd collected over 2 years working as an investigator for the UAP task force inside the Pentagon. He went with his evidence and made a controlled disclosure to the Inspector General within the terms as a whistleblower that's allowed under US law. And it's a matter of public record now that the Inspector General of the intelligence community, a guy called Tom Monheim, made a finding that David Grush's allegations were credible. I'll put emphasis on that again, credible and urgent. And he referred them to Congress for investigation. So now we've got a situation where you have a cognitive dissonance, Grant, between where a lot of the media, especially here in Australia, they take the piss and they say, oh, it's all bullshit, it's all rubbish. And in America, the same thing's happening with a lot of the media. You've got captive newspapers like the Washington Post, the New York Times. A lot of the big newspapers are so dependent on scoops, on tips for their stories from the Pentagon. They don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, so they're not following the story. But meanwhile, under the surface, there's people like me on News Nation and on my social media at Ross Coulthart, and I'm breaking stories all the time about this issue. And it's amazing because it's real. There is a phenomenon that is slowly being uncovered. And right now, before the US Congress, there's legislation that's going to come up for consideration in the next few weeks. And if it passes, all hell will break loose. It's called the Schumer Amendment, and it's named after Chuck Schumer, who's one of the most powerful men in the Congress, one of the most powerful people in the Congress. He's the Senate Majority Leader, probably the second or third most powerful person in the Congress. He has backed legislation that will not only mandate that NHI, non-human intelligence technology or biologics, i.e. bodies, must be revealed to the Congress by any person with that knowledge. He's also requiring the creation of a presidential records review panel, a bit like the JFK records review panel that declassified all the JFK assassination records. And it will compel, by this time next year, the declassification of all records relating to UAPs inside the US government. And so I think that by this time next year, we may very well know what the hell has been going on for the last 80 to 90 years. Because Grush, in his interview with me, he's one of the highest level intelligence officers to ever come forward with any story at all, frankly, from within the Pentagon and the intelligence community. And what does he come forward with to me? He came forward with a story that there are recovered alien, non-human intelligence craft that have secretly been recovered by the United States and are the subject of a secret reverse engineering program that has been illegally and probably criminally kept from the knowledge of Congress for much of the last 60 to 70 years. Now, I think that's
This is the thing. That's a bloody big story, and I can't believe it's not on every page of every newspaper. But the thing is that I struggle in my head, Ross, is why it's been such a secret for 70 years, and then why now? And because you go, how can the American government not know it's happening? So maybe it's one of those three-letter organizations that's perhaps taken these craft and they've kept it secret from their own government. But why now? And it worries me. Why is the American government now going, yes, they're real? I can't help but go, hang on, you've spent 70 years saying they're not. Is there an element of duping in this? Are you now at a point where you have learnt so much, you're already 10 steps ahead of us in whatever the next evolution of this information is leading to? Why now? Why is it okay for them to talk about it now?
Okay, well, in part, it's not. There's a huge resistance happening on the Hill in Congress. There are people like Ohio Congressman Mike Turner, who just so happens to have huge campaign donations from the defence aerospace industry, and other senior politicians are fighting like blue-assed flies to stop this story from getting out. There's a Republican congressman from Tennessee called Tim Burchett, who's very much leading the charge. He's a fairly junior congressman, but he's a good old boy from the South. By golly, he's a loud character. He stands up for himself, and he's been campaigning to get this stuff revealed. But there's a huge pushback happening on the Hill right now, and it's by no means a done deal that even if this Presidential Records Review panel meets, they might stack it. You never know. They might stack it with people who just cover up and conceal. I've got a preponderance of witnesses who've led me to a very strong belief that this is a real story. But I do concede there is always the possibility, and you always have to concede this possibility as a journalist, there is always the possibility that this is some mass disinformation program. Maybe there's been an attempt to conceal a black project. Maybe the US has got some incredible technology that it's developed in the black, and as it has done in the past, it's using UFOs as a way of concealing things like stealth aircraft. I mean, the SR-71 Blackbird, the U-2 spy plane, a lot of people saw those planes when they were still in development and being secretly flown across the United States. And the military actually encouraged the public belief that they were UFOs because they'd so successfully stigmatized the issue of UFOs that it was generally treated with derision and ridicule by the mainstream media, and everybody just laughed it off. But what's happening now? What's happening now is that there are very powerful people at a very high level in Congress, particularly in the Senate, people like Senator Marco Rubio on the Republican side, a member from Florida, and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who's the senator for New York. And it's a bipartisan move. You've got Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez, who's the lefty Democrat in the House from New York. And you've also got Matt Gaetz from Florida, who's an extreme right-winger in the Republicans. And they're agreed, unbelievably, on one thing, UAP disclosure. And one of the difficulties I have is that as a journalist, I'm briefed on a lot of stuff I can't really talk about. I know a lot of the witnesses who've come forward to the Hill, who've given evidence in secret, in sworn testimony to the Hill, to Senate committees, where they've actually testified about what they know, hidden reverse engineering programs, where the craft are located, who are the people, who are the gatekeepers who are concealing this. All this evidence, and this has again been completely lost on the utterly inept US legacy media who have dropped the ball on this story in an appalling way. All of this has been dropped in the House in secret, and so the members of the Congress, senators and House of Representatives members, they are aware of this issue because of their committee membership and because they've been cleared to know it. But it's being kept very secret right now because if this technology can be mastered, if this is real, think of the potential. Think of the possibilities of electromagnetic propulsion systems or anti-gravity, or worse still, the weaponry that could be developed from such systems, or the energy systems that could be developed from whatever it is that's propelling these craft. I mean, there have been estimates done by modern physicists that for a kind of a faster than light craft to even be capable of existing, it has to be able to harness the energy equivalent to that of our sun. And we're not at that stage as a civilization. But something is. This is the amazing thing about this, is that I'm talking to scientists, physicists, who say, if you just accept the raw data that is now in existence, the incontrovertible evidence of objects doing those 5, 6 observables, those supposedly impossible maneuvers, both in our atmosphere, under our oceans. I mean, some of these objects have been detected by US submarines moving at hypersonic speeds underwater, faster than the speed of sound underwater. And I've spoken to submariners who've been listening and observing these objects, not only in America, in Australia. I mean, our country is holding back on what it knows as well. And I don't think it's an elaborate conspiracy, guys. I think it's more that I think it's more that the US, Australia, Britain, France, Russia, China, they actually don't want to have to admit to their citizenry how little they know.
Yeah.
But what I
Okay.
can tell you is I do think the evidence is becoming overwhelming. And I have this conversation regularly with people in the defense and intelligence community, not just in the US, but in this country and also overseas. I do think the evidence is overwhelming that there is a non-human intelligence. That's the new word, NHI, not necessarily alien, because it might be interdimensional. It might not be from this universe. So the word NHI has been coined to describe what we're talking about. There is an intelligence allegedly engaging with this planet that's been taking an interest in particularly our nuclear weapons, probably out of concern. They've been monitored over nuclear weapons sites, over nuclear power repositories, and they've been monitoring some of the most sensitive military facilities in the world, including Pine Gap in Australia and Northwest Cape in Australia. And people don't realise in Australia that we have two of the top bases that are absolutely important for America in the event of a nuclear war. In the event of a nuclear war, do not be anywhere near Alice Springs or a place called Pine Gap or Exmouth in Western Australia. Both of those locations contain bases that are integral to the American strategic nuclear defence, and they will be obliterated in a nuclear war. And something has been taking a very close interest in those bases. I've spoken to
How do you know?
American and Australian people who've told me firsthand of objects being seen and detected around those locations.
Right.
What I love about that, Ross, is that this story's been told, over many decades about objects appearing over nuclear missile facilities and nuclear launch sites where suddenly those facilities have been taken offline and shut down. We've also seen projectiles that have been fired that have also been neutralized by objects. So they clearly have some interest or concern about our nuclear weapons. Now, do you think that? What do you reckon that's about? Is that they have a concern for us destroying ourselves, or is it destroying the fabric of time? That nuclear missiles are so big that they could cause a rip, in other universes and destroy them? Why are they so worried about it and us?
What you're speculating about there, and it is speculation because we just obviously have no idea. There are physicists who have speculated that particularly hydrogen bombs, when hydrogen bombs were starting to be exploded at the Nevada test range in the 1940s and the 1950s, it's a matter of public record. There are files that record that scientists at White Sands, New Mexico, where this was all happening, were seeing on a frequent basis craft, objects, spheres, triangles hovering over the nuclear test site, clearly taking a very close interest in those nuclear weapons tests. And particularly when hydrogen bombs started being exploded, the volume, the intensity of those sightings increased. And there's been speculation, and I've got no scientific knowledge of this myself, that maybe what happens is there is some kind of interdimensional interference caused by the explosion of a hydrogen bomb that is interfering with the life and enjoyment of people in other universes. Because we do know that under the theories of a multiple universe existence, we do know that there are other universes that modern science now concedes not just the likelihood, but the probability that we live in a multiple universe world. And so maybe one of the explanations is that whatever it is that we're doing by testing nuclear weapons, it's upsetting the neighborhood. And you referred quite rightly to incidents involving meddling with nuclear weapons. There's a guy that I've interviewed who's described how his 10 nuclear missiles that he was responsible for were literally shut down, allegedly, by a giant UFO that hovered over his nuclear missile silo in the 1960s. And he, to this day, maintains that he believes that that object interfered with his nuclear weapons systems, put them offline. on the other side of the world, in Russia, there have been declassified reports where a guy was literally sitting in a nuclear weapons silo in Russia, and all of a sudden the missiles powered up to literally one button short of launch. They were in a mad panic because they thought that this missile was going to launch and cause a nuclear war. And they think, I mean, I've spoken to people in Russia who are as equally as puzzled and as concerned by this phenomenon as people like Australians and people in the American military are. The Russians have conceded they're as bemused and as puzzled and bewildered by it as we all are, that there is definitely some kind of phenomenon that is taking an interest in nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons technology. And I think that's a story. And it's interesting. There's a guy called Bob Hastings who's written a book called UFOs and Nukes. It's a fantastic book. And Bob first learned about this whole issue when he was a kid working at an Air Force base, sweeping the floors in a radar room. And he was doing it for a student job. And one of the radar operators called him over and said, have a look at this, and pointed to a scope, and he could see these objects moving across the scope at high speed. And he tells this story in his book. And so that intrigued him. And so he started investigating whether or not there were sightings happening, particularly over nuclear weapons silos. And what he discovered was that almost without exception, every single nuclear weapons silo in the American Strategic Command had been visited, had reported these incidents. And it was a unique piece of research. If people say, you know, give me the data, give me the evidence about UFOs, I'm giving it to you. This is a guy who's written a definitive text, beautifully researched with corroborative witnesses saying that they experienced extraordinary incidents. The guy I'm telling you about, Bob Salas, S-A-L-A-S, who had this incident in the 1960s. He came out publicly and spoke about what he saw at the Malmstrom Air Force Base. And then other men came forward and described what they'd seen on their so-called flights of nuclear missile systems. And it turned out that the UFOs had interfered with an entire area of nuclear missiles. It was almost like they were letting them know, we're here, we don't like you doing this stuff, stop it, and we can stop you from doing it. And it's interesting because, again, I mean, I actually think one of the great tragedies that will be recorded in 10 or 15 years' time when it's a matter of public knowledge that this is real, I hope it's earlier than that, will be the failure of the media to properly investigate this and the failure of large sections of the proper levels of oversight in government to do their job, to take it properly seriously and investigate it. And what's happening now is there is the beginning of a change in America. The US, again, as usual, is ahead of us on a transparency accountability issue. They've recognized that this is a huge deficiency, a huge oversight. And so there are key opinion leaders, key politicians in the Congress who have briefed me privately, and I've interviewed some of them, and they've told me that they are determined to get to the truth of this, even if it reveals what David Grush says is criminal behavior. David's told me, my interviewee in May, told me that people have been murdered to protect this secret. And moreover, that the phenomenon of whatever this non-human intelligence is has, on occasion, caused injury or death to some human beings. And there are people that I'm talking to at a very high level in governments all around the world, not just the US and not just the Australian government, who think that it's time this story was told. And so I'm not saying you're going to see
to us as if they were an enemy, or to neutralize them being discovered or knowing more.
Don't know. No idea.
Wow.
But if you go back, there's a series of incidents that took place in Brazil, for example, that are a matter of public record, called Colares, Coalres. And there's a great video channel called Red Panda Koala on YouTube, who's done a fantastic pull together telling the Colares story. And it's chilling because local villagers in a very remote part of Brazil were describing how craft were hovering over them beaming down beams of light, some kind of laser beam light, and people were dying, suffering horrific injuries. And this happened over a course of several months. It was investigated by the Brazilian military. People from the Brazilian military have done interviews confirming that these incidents took place. They've confirmed that people were killed. Now, I'm told that this has been happening all over the world, and I'm not trying to scare people, but what fascinates me is we're at a stage now where even in the public records, Bill Clinton, when he was president, declassified a lot of the records of the CIA and other intelligence agencies and forced the disclosure of a huge number of UAP records. And they show that the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which is America's overseas spy agency, the NSA, the National Security Agency, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, all of these records were declassified going right back to the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s, revealing that contrary to what the public was being told, the US never stopped investigating UFOs, UAPs, and moreover, it recorded incidents that were being publicly denied at the time by the US, including, as I tell in my book, In Plain Sight. I actually talk about how there are records recording the recovery of craft by US military.
See, this is
in an operation called Operation Moondust. And the thing that fascinates me is this isn't me making this up. These are official government records. And what
Ross,
I find utterly
answer this for me. Like this is another thing that I struggle to get in my head around. If they're such sophisticated craft, how are they crashing? How are they crashing? How many of them could there be? And where are they? And my third point is, okay, so how are they crashing? Why are they crashing? Where are they? How many are there? And is there a facility, is there, believe, one so big there is potentially a large building built over it?
Yes. Yes to all. I was told by multiple sources that one of these objects was so large, they put a building over it. And a lot of people have been very angry with me for not revealing where that building is, and for good reasons that will become obvious when it becomes public. For good reason, I can't reveal why, but the building serves a dual purpose, and that other purpose is extremely important for national security. And even though I'm a journalist and I think it's important that people reveal things that are criminal or illegal, I can respect and understand why the location of that particular object can't be revealed. But yes, there are allegedly more than... You're talking double figures. Dave Grush wouldn't reveal exactly how many the US has in its possession, but you're talking double figures. Now, you used the word crashed. I don't. On some of these occasions, I think it's possible that these objects were left deliberately. And
as a technology exchange to kind of kick us further up the road and advance us as a civilization?
I have no idea. I have no idea. But greater minds than I have suggested that objects, craft, and I say objects because I'm being neutral, were left deliberately for humans to find. I don't know what that means. I've got no idea. And I think eventually, if and when the US is forced into an admission about this, we'll know more. But certainly it does appear that the US is in possession of multiple craft, but so also is Russia and China. And this is one of the reasons, I suspect, why a lot of this is being kept secret, because, as David Grush told me in an interview, there is a secret Cold War going on. It's been going on for quite some time. Competition to recover, retrieve, and back-engineer this technology. And it's got quite nasty at times. You know, there's literally been races to get to technology. One of the allegations that I've been apprised of is that the US has developed the capacity to track, to know where these objects are going to appear, and to then bring them down with a so-called EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. I'm still in the process of checking that allegation. I've spoken to a number of people about it, but I'd like to prove it up more before I say much more about it.
Yeah, I have.
Imagine all those people who have been it's basically gaslighting
Mm.
for years. And a lot of those people, the very early ones, the witnesses, have probably died or gone to their grave feeling like they are crazy.
Mm.
Yep.
They are being told that what they've seen, what they've lived, they've believed, is unacceptable. And there's clearly so many of them.
Mm.
So
And those
sad.
that even I don't know where you sort of stand on abductions or those that may have been experimented on. That's the far end of that kind of one-on-one UAP experience.
I just don't know. I mean,
do you have
the simple
anything
thing
on
is,
those?
yeah, well, the simple problem I have, I mean, I agree with you, by the way, that it is a huge issue that people have been vilified. People have been ridiculed. People have actually killed themselves. I mean, one of the guys who was a visitor to Australia was a guy called Dr. James McDonald, a very reputable physicist who came out to investigate the 1966 Westall incident involving a public school in Melbourne that saw craft overhead in broad daylight. And he went back to America, and his career was basically destroyed for taking the stand that he took as a scientist. And he ended up allegedly shooting himself, which is terrible. And there've been multiple incidents of people losing their jobs, losing their careers. Anybody that speaks out about this issue gets vilified and ridiculed, including myself, by the way. I mean, there are a lot of media who've taken the piss with me since I started taking this issue seriously. But as I often say, they have no idea what they're talking about. They're operating from a position of ill-informed ignorance. And frankly, if they were speaking to the sources that I'm talking to and the witnesses that I know, they would be taking this seriously indeed. I mean, I've spent most of my career, Grant, as you know, working for reputable public affairs shows like Four Corners, 60 Minutes, Spotlight, and I don't go into these stories lightly. You have a level of evidence that you accept is reasonable to assume a story is worth investigating. And I freely admit, when I first started investigating this story, I thought I was going to discover a black project. I thought I was going to discover some kind of secret Lockheed Martin program where they were developing craft in the black that were now being slowly revealed to the public. But instead, what I stumbled across was an extraordinary number of exhortations and admissions from officials in the US government saying, yep, this is real, Ross. We're as bemused about it as you are. We suspect that there's a cover-up going on inside our own government. We think that there are people in private aerospace that know a lot more that they're letting on. We think there are people in our military and our intelligence services who are lying to cover it all up. And we think it was all part of a misguided attempt to conceal this during the Cold War, probably for, at the time, laudable reasons, that's now got out of control. And you asked me somewhere, Grant, why now? I think what's happened is that since the end of the Cold War, there's become the increasing realization that it's utterly implausible to maintain the pretense that there's any good reason to conceal the existence of NHI, a non-human intelligence, from the human race. There may be good reason to conceal technology that's been recovered, perhaps weaponry that can be developed, perhaps propulsion systems or energy systems that would give America a strategic advantage, God forbid, in any confrontation with China or Russia. So I can kind of understand how the national security state might keep that classified. But what I don't understand and what I think is unforgivable is the way that people have been ridiculed and attacked and stigmatized for basically taking this issue seriously. On the abduction issue, I just don't know. I truly, it's impossible to get data because if you're not with somebody in their bedroom or wherever it is that they're saying that they're being abducted, frankly, how do we know that it's real? And is it possible that what they're experiencing, whilst it feels like a real physical phenomenon that they are being taken on board a craft, maybe it's just something, again, that sixth observable is doing. Maybe that's making them think that that's what happened to them. We just don't know. One thing I won't do, though, is belittle people who say that they've been abducted. I just don't think that's fair. There is a phenomenon here that needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be being investigated.
What about the idea that is anyone you've ever spoken to had the belief or that perhaps there had been some intervention from these entities along our human existence, or either whether we've been sort of altered genetically or whether the advancement of human beings had been intervened with or interacted with or kicked a little further up the road
There's certainly a lot of speculation about
from
that. I mean,
intervention?
one of the papers I could send you if you were interested is a paper that was done by Eastern European scientists that looked at the rates of random genetic mutation. And then they looked at the human genome, and they basically make the argument that mathematically it's utterly impossible for human beings to have evolved from apes with the rapidity that we did without some kind of external shove. And they claim that they've found anomalies in the human genome which suggest some kind of external artificial intervention in the human genome. Now, that's disputed, of course, by some reputable geneticists and scientists. And so, the bottom line is I'm not equipped to be able to make an argument for or against, but there are people that have suggested to me, and this is only, I suspect, speculation, that the human genome has been meddled with. And it has been suggested that we are hybrids, perhaps God, as we understand God, some kind of huge, overwhelming consciousness. Maybe we're the creation of an AI. I mean, is it possible that what we've thought of as religions all these many thousands of years that we use to explain our moral bases and how we run our lives, maybe they're a code that was laid down for us by some kind of uber consciousness that dictates and looks over us, and maybe the notions of a religious God or spiritual ideas of some kind of supreme consciousness, maybe that's our creator. I've got no idea. I mean, we simply don't know. But again, I think these issues need to be investigated, because one of the things that is a really consistent thing through all human religions, as you've observed at the very beginning of this conversation, is there are constant references in all religions, including the Hindu Vedic texts, to flaming chariots in the sky, to glowing orbs, spheres, wheels in the sky. Right through human history, there is a phenomenon that has just been there, over our shoulder. So what is it? And why do we stigmatize it so? Because the other thing I found fascinating is that when I started looking at the issue of what the US government knew about this issue, some of my sources pointed me back to CIA documents from the 1950s, shortly after a panel called the Robertson Panel did a finding that essentially debunked the whole UFO story. And those documents, which are real, verified, authentic documents, show that the CIA and the Defense Department in the US actively made a decision to play down and stigmatize and treat with ridicule and taboo and dismissiveness the subject of UAPs. And so they'd followed a deliberate public policy of treating UAPs, UFOs, with derision and ridicule. They played it down in the media. They discouraged the media from doing investigative stories into the phenomenon. Yet at the same time, the official records in the archives show that these objects were being taken very seriously indeed. And the American military, as early as 1948, wrote memos where they accepted that one of the possible explanations for these objects, the most likely explanation, was that it was some kind of extraterrestrial intelligence, because it couldn't be explained by known human technology. And here we are, what is that, nearly 80 years later, and we're now on the cusp of a realization that the US government may be about to make an admission. And I think that's really exciting. And it's one of the reasons why, as a journalist, I've dedicated a large part of the last couple of years to investigating it. I wrote a book about it called In Plain Sight. I also did films for Channel 7 Spotlight, which anybody can view by going to the Spotlight YouTube channel. And those films became, like, I just couldn't believe how quickly they took off. They've been watched by tens of millions of people. And yet, if you go out and try and get stories done in mainstream newspapers or magazines or even on a lot of TV channels, Channel 7's a rare exception, it's very, very hard to persuade network bosses or editors to allow you to do these stories because they've got that stigma, they've got that hang-up about the subject matter, which I think is completely unwarranted. I'm telling you, as a serious insect investigative journalist, there's something behind all this that is real, and it deserves to be investigated. We're not saying it's little green men from the planet Zug and Zeta Reticuli star system. We just don't know. But isn't it absurd that throughout human history there's been these recorded witness experiencer incidents, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them? They've crammed the records databases and they're all over the world. They're not just in the US. They're not just in Western countries. You go to any country, any nation, any culture, anywhere in the world, and they're all seeing these anomalous objects. And moreover, the Pentagon, in its most recent report to Congress in July, it officially admitted, kicking and screaming, of course, because it doesn't want to have to admit this, it officially admitted that there are so-called anomalous metallic spheres being seen all over the world by witnesses, including US military witnesses, and they've been recorded by drones and by US sensor military video technology, and they cannot explain them. And they're doing all of these observables that we described earlier: hypersonic maneuvers, instantaneous acceleration, stealth mode, transmedium mode, and they're showing positive lift with no visible means of propulsion, no rotors, no jet blasts, no rocket motors. Nobody can explain how these objects are doing these things. I happen to think that's worth investigating.
Oh yes! Oh my God! I'm converted.
Yeah.
I am.
It's big.
Yeah, Grant's been trying to tell me for ages. I mean, I'm open-minded, but yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Well, I had an F-35 fighter pilot in my living room not long ago, and he told me he's an Australian Air Force pilot, and he came to see me, and he told me he has seen these objects and he cannot explain them. And I said, "Have you reported them to your superiors?" And he went, "What do you think? Why would you?"
Yeah.
I mean, the Australian
Exactly. How many
government
people-
still has its head in the sand on this issue.
I hope if they're here for good. You know, if there's an arms race between, Russia and China and America, and the technology gets mastered, whoever gets there first wins. Such is the technological advancement. So I hope it doesn't just become that. And I hope now that they're coming out and saying that these things do exist, that they haven't already mastered the technology, and there's going to be some sort of false flag incident where now, under the cover of UAPs or UFOs, we can now invade each other because we can now replicate them and look like them. You know what I mean? We're punching at shadows because we don't know the truth. And that's frightening. But I certainly do hope that they're there because they care and that they want to look after us, and that they don't want us to blow ourselves up, and they certainly don't want to ruin their part of whatever universe that they're living in. I hope it's good intent and they're not evil.
Well, I can tell you that certainly not in our government in Australia, but at the US Congress, there is the beginning of an acknowledgement that the public does have a right to know about this, because it is becoming very, very clear that something very sinister has been hidden from the American public and from the Congress. And under the US Constitution, Congress rules. It's not the president. It's not sections of the US military or defense community, intelligence community that rule. They're all answerable to Congress. And what's clear from the evidence that I've got from witnesses and the evidence that's been given under oath to the Congress is that there has been quite improper, illegal withholding of information from the oversight committees in Congress that spend the US government money and that are entitled to regulate how that money is spent. There's been lies told. There's been deceit about where that money has been spent. Now, it might have been done for noble causes. There may have been military officials who thought that they were doing the right thing, but there's soon about to become a reckoning. And at that point, I think
you're sitting on some pretty Sorry, you're sitting on some pretty powerful information, Ross. Do you ever get scared that somebody's going to come and,
Knock you off?
Wow.
President Kennedy you?
Well, do you?
Well, it's funny, actually. I'm doing a story about the JFK assassination for the American network I'm working with at the moment. And one of the people I was talking to, because he knows that I'm interested in the UFO, UAP issue, he said, are you going to do the story about how they killed JFK because of the UAPs? And it's interesting because I don't subscribe necessarily to that theory that JFK was murdered because of his interest in the phenomenon of UAPs. But there is quite a body of evidence to show that JFK was encouraging the CIA to be more collaborative with the Russians and to share information on unidentified objects in that space between the US and Russia. Because what was happening was fighter jets were being scrambled on both sides with nuclear weapons on board because they thought a nuclear attack was underway. And they were seeing these unidentified objects in US airspace. And I've just recently done a story in the US where I revealed on this network I'm working with that there were, shortly before the shoot-down incidents that we all know about in February, where a Chinese balloon was shot down and 3 other unidentified objects were shot down, I've been briefed about an earlier incident that took place over the Arctic Circle where 8 or 9 UAPs were identified on radar. US fighter jets were sent to try and intercept them, and whatever they were, they manoeuvred away at such speed and manoeuvres the fighter jets couldn't catch up with them. And that happens all the time. And I don't know why we're not being told about this. I've got no theories as to why governments are withholding these secrets, but I think we've got a right to know.
There's going to be a mass panic as well.
I don't know.
I hope not.
Potentially, because I mean,
I don't know if there would be, Laura, because look how it's not a big topic. It should be, but maybe. So I don't think there's signs of hysteria because there's no one really. Everyone kind of reads about it and then moves on very quickly. I don't know if there will be hysteria. Perhaps if your religion is questioned, and then.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I know one of the arguments that was made very early on in the Cold War was that the American public would be confronted because they were so God-fearing and so many people were Christian. And the idea of a non-human intelligence was perceived to be in some ways hostile to the religious belief of a kind of humanocentric universe with God and Jesus and all those ideas. But I've spoken to people in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church, funnily enough, has acknowledged the probability that we do live in a universe with multiple different intelligences. And the Catholic Church, probably more than any other of the state religions, has basically come out and acknowledged that it's preparing for the likelihood of an extraterrestrial intelligence one day being identified. And I suspect the Catholic Church knows a lot more than it's letting on because it's got some of the best archives, some of the best databases going back hundreds, if not thousands of years.
The Vatican. Is it built over a UAP?
Oh, it's the Pope.
It's the Vatican.
I cannot comment.
It's the Pope.
Why would you do that to us, Ross Coulthart?
Oh, classic. At the time, we said that we'd keep you for half an hour, Ross. I'm so sorry. We're heavily invested now into this topic. Give yourself a huge plug. So people who want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
Okay, if they want to watch my documentaries that I've made, they can go to the Channel 7 Spotlight page, and it will have Ross Coulthart UFOs, and you'll find all my documentaries. If you want to watch my vodcast podcast, you can go to Need to Know on YouTube, or just put Need to Know Ross Coulthart into any podcast channel and you'll find me there. I co-host a podcast with a Hollywood producer called Bryce Zabel, which has become quite a hit across the world. We get a lot of people really interested in us breaking news about the UAP issue. I also wrote a best-selling book about the UAP issue called In Plain Sight, which is in a new edition just this month. And you can get that book from all good bookshops. It's published by HarperCollins, and it's in new edition just this last month.
Well, I'm so glad you've left mainstream media and journalism behind. I'm glad you're not
to investigate this.
kicking in the doors of plumbers who have done dodgy jobs and aren't paying their bills, and you're not working for a current affair or anything like that, and you're doing real good stuff for us humans. Keep on the case. Keep us updated. Any developments that come along, please let us know, because it's such a fascinating, juicy story for humanity. And I'm glad you're on the case, mate.
It's a great story, and I'll keep on telling it. Thanks very much, guys.
It's All True, the podcast with Grant and Shezzy Denya.
Bye bye. See you next time.